perpetual issues about interagency transfers. 2 years ago, I pointed out there were some what I thought were illegal transfers of agency funds to other offices. What's the status of your computerization, digitalization as regards to this particular issue?
The system is called Budget and Treasury Management System. It is for procurement at the moment.
Ito na nga, Stella Quimbo, tameme at supal palang inabot matapos tanungin sa mga illegal transactions na nagaganap sa agency funds papunta sa ibang ahensya. Pero bago ang lahat, maaari kayong mag-subscribe para maging updated sa mga issue at bagong mga balita. Wala ang may sagot itong si Quimbo matapos uladin ng tanong ni Representative Paul Dasa sa mga illegal transactions sa agency funds na nilalaan sa mga proyektong hindi naman kasama at pondong nasa bank account niya. Stella Quimbo hindi nga makasagot at panaylingon sa likuran makahingi lang ng tulong. Quimbo, bistong-bisto na sa ginagawang pagnanakaw sa kaban ng bayan. Narito ang buong detalye.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good evening to my colleagues who are still here and to the DBM officials. Madam Speaker, my understanding of the budget cycle, the implementing the executive offices, sometime first quarter of the year, will submit a proposed budget for the following year. Then they go through the budget call and they defend their proposed budget to the DBM. Then eventually, all of that will usually be reduced based on the DBCC set limits, and the NEP is forwarded to the House. Would that be a simplified version of the process, Madam Speaker?
Yes, that's a fairly good summary of the process.
So I'm curious, for the DBM budget, for their operational budget, do they submit to themselves during budget call? And then who does the vetting, the due diligence for the DBM budget?
Madam Speaker, Your Honor, there is also a bureau in charge. So in effect, there is a unit within the DBM that vets its own budget.
Okay, and I'm just curious, normally, what would be the percentage of DBM's proposed budget will actually be funded in the NEP? What would be the usual, say you have a wish list, so I'm just curious if you're cut the similarly as the other executive offices.
So, Madam Speaker, what was proposed by the DBM for 2025 was the proposed was 4B, and the recommended was 3 billion.
Not much of a reduction, unlike other agencies. Okay, well, thank you for the candid response. I was just curious how DBM budget is analyzed, but so it's still within the DBM. Let me move on to the second one. 2 years ago, I had asked the same sponsor, and the same secretary was here, and there were similar officials who were here, about my concerns or perpetual issues about interagency transfers. 2 years ago, I pointed out there were some what I thought were illegal transfers of agency funds to other offices. And apparently, some departments or agencies will transfer funds for various reasons. Sometimes to avoid maybe procurement restrictions within their department. Sometimes it's to show that they have higher utilization. So it doesn't appear in their account. So I had asked 2 years ago if the DBM had the capability to track interagency transfers or similar type of transfers. And the answer then was the DBM was at the onset of a digitalization, computerization, and was going to include it as a priority measure so that the department can track this, what we call so-called interagency transfers. So does the DBM now have that capability? What's the status of your computerization, digitalization as regards to this particular issue?
The system is called Budget and Treasury Management System. It is for procurement at the moment. The proposed budget is 575 M. So it's not yet there, but they do track interagency transfers, but they do it at the moment manually. And they will.
Okay.
So,
First of all, let me
but
deal.
definitely, as a result of your queries, the system is almost going to be there.
Well, okay. Thank you for that honest response. I was hoping 2 years ago, it was already going to be implemented, but it's okay. Better late than never. I think it's an institutional improvement. But so I support the department, Madam Speaker. So I'm happy to hear there's, I assume, 500 million included in the 2025 National Expenditure Program.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and is that sufficient to pursue the digitalization?
Not yet.
Well, if is it a multi-year by phase type of project?
Oh, this is for phase one, but it will require 2 more. The total project cost is Total project cost is 3 billion.
Madam Speaker, I support that. I leave it to the wisdom of the sponsor and the committee. I mean, should they believe that that particular item should be augmented to fast track that project for next year? I'm 100% sure the minority bloc will support that. This representation will support that. But let me move on to the next one. So thank you for your responses, and I hope that you really push that, and hopefully next year, part of it will be operational or soon to be operational. So it was mentioned that the DBM can now track interagency transfers. It's done, I guess, a little bit more manually. So are you being able to do that now?
They've always been tracking interagency transfers, but manually.
Okay, well, if they were, DBM was somewhat silent about it. Since the sponsor said they've been tracking interagency transfers, does DBM have a standard report on interagency transfers?
It's on the website of each agency. It's called the Statement of Obligations, Disbursements, Liquidations, and Balances for Interagency Fund Transfers. And this is for the source agency.
Okay,
So
Madam
it's
Speaker,
uploaded.
just to clarify, so if a department, let's say, year-end, wants to show a higher utilization, there are some agencies, departments that will transfer the funds to the regional office and make it appear it's obligated. But it hasn't been obligated, it hasn't even been procured, it's sitting, let's say, in the regional office. There are some departments who will transfer the funds to another bank account, BBP or Land Bank, and then make it appear that it's already been utilized. Uh, 2 years ago, the reason I asked that, there was one department that transferred funds to another agency to somehow make it easier to procure what they wanted to procure. And that was reflected as utilized, even though the receiving department, another agency, had not obligated that amount. So those type of transfers will be reflected in that SAOB that was mentioned earlier, that's in the website.
There's a circular issued in 2022, which prohibits the transfer of funds to another agency for purposes of procurement. So that is no longer allowed.
And that's a new department.
And that is also adopted in the new procurement law.
And that, I'm sorry, that's a department order that was mentioned, DBM department
It's a
order.
GPPB resolution 27-2022.
27-2022.
2022.
Okay, well, I think that's good. So meaning, Madam Speaker, just to clarify, I'll take advantage. If, let's say, agency A wants to transfer funds to, let's say, PITC, and as of today, would that be allowed? Or even, let's say, agency A transfers funds for procurement to the DBM procurement service. That's not allowed, for the record, as of today.
Not allowed, Madam Speaker. So you are not allowed to transfer the fund. So but you are allowed, you're allowed to procure, to engage the other agency as a procurement agent. In other words, you cannot window dress your numbers by transferring funds.
Madam Speaker, I support that. I think that's better practice. It's an improvement to the prior practices. So just to clarify for the record, as they say, give credit where credit is due. And I support what the DBM is doing on this issue. That became effective which calendar year?
2022.
22. Okay, that's good. I think that's an improvement. And are there any exemptions? Usually there's a general rule, then there'll be an exemption. Is there an
There are
exemption?
no exemptions, Madam Speaker. No exemptions.
Even if the DBM recommends, if a department requests, DBM recommends, and then the office of the president approves, that would not be allowed.
Oh, no exemptions.
Okay. I think that's probably an institutional improvement. So I congratulate DBM for dealing with this issue head on. I think that's very good. especially the fact that it's now being reported in their website. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Madam
But
Speaker.
there would, if everyone's complying, there wouldn't be any reporting of agency transfers. It would be zero. Is that correct, Madam Speaker?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm happy that we had some improvement in this particular aspect. Madam Speaker, my last topic, for calendar year 20, let's just say the last 3 years, 2022, 23, 24, I had asked in advance to prepare what is the NEP to GAA modification by way of institutional, individual amendment, whether we call it amendment, modification, realignment. Let's start with 2022 from NEP to GAA. Just the total amount that was that we consider amendments to the NEP.
You're looking at total changes, right?
Yes, total. Don't need any details on that.
NEP versus GA. So for for 2022, the total is 94.993 billion. In 2023, the total is 145.606 billion. And for 2024, 229.492 billion.
Okay. Just to clarify, because there seems to be some inconsistency, I'm referring to any movement, any
Yes.
deviation,
Yes.
any
And then,
modification amendment, because last year I asked the same question for 2023. The response from what I recall, I only asked for 1 year last year. The answer was, I think, 413 billion for 2023. So now it's down to 200.
100, for 2023, it's 145.6.
Yeah, that seems not consistent with prior information. Is there an official, may I ask the sponsor, is there an official report? Does the DBM track that from NEP to GAB to GAA? And is that reported, I'm curious, in the website, or is that an internal document to the Office of the President, so that the President can make an informed decision to, let's say, whether to veto or support any amendments to the NEP?
Well, but these are all verifiable. These are all verifiable numbers.
And how do we verify, Madam Speaker?
I mean, the 2023 NEP, for example, is a public document. 2023 GA is a public document. And so one can easily compute the numbers.
As a member of the House, I even have a hard time tracking because there's over 100 departments and agencies and offices. Does the DBM DBM have a template report? Do they actually track that, and is that published?
So currently, according to the DBM, it is not published.
Okay. And when you said, let's say for 2024, it's 200,
229,
I'm sorry, how much?
229.492.
Okay. That 229, could you explain to me what would that be, an accumulation of which numbers? So let's say DOH, if the NEP DOH is, let's say 100 billion NEP, if it's 110 GAA, final version, it would be
Ma-
plus 10 billion. Would that be correct?
Sorry, repeat the number.
So
please.
if let's say the
NEP.
NEP is 100B and then GAH 110,
Yes. So
the
that
number
changes.
that was
plus
mentioned
10.
earlier would reflect the 10.
Yes. And then you do that for all departments. It could be a plus or a minus.
Okay.
And if you take the sum across all departments, that would be the number that I reported to you.
Okay, if there's a reduction in a particular item or department, that would also be reflected as a plus
Absolutely.
in the total
Yes.
amount.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
So if a certain department at 100B, the NEP, final version's 90, so based on my question on what was amended, that would also be reflected as 10 billion.
Minus. If it's a reduction.
Well,
from
no,
the-
see, that's why I wanted to clarify. My question is, any modification, realignment, what would be the total amount? That's actually, because it's a fixed budget, my question is the movement. What's moved, whether it's a reduction or an increase?
One minute suspension, Madam Speaker.
Session is suspended.
Recognized, Madam Speaker.
The Honorable Representative Paul Dasa is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the indulgence of the sponsor and my colleagues and DBM, let me rephrase the question again, just for better terminology. May I ask the sponsor for calendar year 2022, 23, 24, what are the total amounts of congressional introduced changes, amendments, or adjustments, meaning House and Senate from NEP to GAA?
So
Even ballpark figure na lang po, Madam Speaker.
So the numbers that I mentioned earlier are those, except that they do not include the movements within the departments.
Would the DBM have the capability now to estimate that, let's say for even 2024 or 2023?
Yes, Madam Speaker, Your Honor.
And what would the amounts be more or less? Just for the sake of governance and transparency. Even an estimated amount, Madam Speaker. While they're searching, Madam Speaker, I asked these questions to help the leadership, to help both the legislature and the executive branch to be able to digest large amounts, large movements from departments, which I think makes for better governance. The more data, the more info that's shared to the public, to the decision makers, I think the better, because I don't have the benefit of this data, or at least not officially. I have my own estimates, but it's good for the DBM to think about this question, because I wanted to ask a follow-up question once we have the kind of ballpark estimate, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, would it be possible for the DBM to just submit the requested information tomorrow?
Okay, that's fine. I think the point I wanted to make was not so much the amounts that are initiated by the House and Senate and then eventually agreed on by the Office of the President, but I want to ask the sponsor, because the DBM's here, it's a golden opportunity, that does the DBM track this and collate it as a report? And then if they do, is that something that's submitted to the President or to the decision makers in Malacanang before the actual signing of the budget with certain vetoes? I'm curious if that's something that the DBM thinks would be valuable in the budget transparency process.
Madam Speaker, Your Honor, there's a certain level of reporting that would make sense to be reported, but perhaps not all levels of, I mean, meaning that there's certain details that are just too many, that meaning there are many items in the book that if you track all changes, there could be too many pieces of information and could be overwhelming and therefore may not be useful for decision making at a certain level. So perhaps what I had presented to you would be useful at the cabinet level, for example. So that's something that the DBM can do, as he had suggested. And there could be other reports that they can develop following this suggestion, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
But the point being, it has to be carefully thought of what kind of reports will be useful at that level. Because not all, because of the too many details, because in the end, they may not be useful.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, I think the response is rational, it's logical. I'm only just wanted to point out that I support the decision of the Committee on Appropriations. Maybe for some minor things I don't, but overall in the last 2 years, I voted yes for the budget. I think the Speaker and the Chairman and the Vice Chairs have done a good job, but I also wanted to balance that to make sure that there are adequate reports coming from the DBM that will help the Office of the President and the decision makers make a better informed decision. Because we're always pressed for time, we're always in a rush, we all want to pass that. So it's something that I just wanted to throw out to the DBM. And in fact, that kind of reporting would be a pre-GAA signing. My last question is, once the GAA is done, there will be more time. And does the DBM publish any reports now on the final, on the variances between the President's proposed budget, which is the NEP, to the final version GAA? So post-GAA, are there any reports on variations?
According to the DBM, none.
Would it be serve a purpose for the public, for all the institutions to have at least some sort of a summary on how the House, the Senate, and the executive branch performed and what decisions were made during the budget season? Some sort of summary, because wouldn't it make sense to have a summary from NEP to GAA that would support my contention of better budget transparency?
Just a reminder.
Yes, the DBM will certainly consider this suggestion once, especially once the BPMS, the budget, what do you call it? The budget treasury management system, especially once that is up and running, that can certainly help. But certainly all of your recommendations for more transparency, that everything is all very welcome. So thank you very much, Madam Speaker, Your Honor, for all your suggestions.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, we will support the committee regarding should there be a need to augment the funds for the digitalization, computerization of the DBM, because they're so critical in terms of all departments in terms of budget and financial concerns. So thank you so much for the responses and being candid with this representation. Madam Speaker, there being no more members who wish to ask questions, I move to terminate the period of sponsored debate of the Department of Budget Management, including any and all agencies or corporations.
Madam Speaker, on the part of the majority, we join the minority in the motion to terminate the interpellations of the proposed budget of the DBM and the lump sum provisions of House Bill 10800. Thank you, Madam Speaker.